Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? So, we're going to be talking about how to defend as a free to play, or really in general, how you know when you can actually hit the attacks, right? So, you guys are probably, you're probably thinking, what's the rundown here? How am I going to determine whether I can win an attack, when I'm getting attacked, etc.? Well, to begin with, all right, first place we're going to start off with is your heroes on your wall, all right? Now, obviously, as you can tell here, I've got a lot of pay to win heroes, and obviously, most of you guys out there probably don't have those. But when you are trying to defend, all right, the one thing that I recommend you do is you need to first establish what exactly are you. Are you an infantry, a cav, or a range focused player? That means what attack stat are you trying to increase the most? Because ultimately, when you are getting attacked, that means whatever phalanx you are in is usually going to be the stat that you are trying to jack up the attack stat on as high as you possibly can. All right, now, assuming you're free to play, all right, most free to play players are probably going to be fairly mixed or light for the most part, and so that stat isn't going to matter as much. But what I recommend you do is kind of go with a 3-2 kind of mindset, all right? So a lot of the time, what I'll do is, one of the two leaders that are more than acceptable, all right, are basically Rose Knight or Bomb and Goblin. The reason being is because they are the only two free-to-play army attack heroes that you can get access to, assuming, of course, that you don't get Watcher or Chaos Dragon, all right, because these two are obviously army attack heroes as well, which is just that much more on topping that you can really get there if you're capable of getting them. But obviously not everybody out there is capable, and so I will kind of ignore those and pretend that they're not there for right now. But look, the mindset is that, so when you let's suppose you just put these two heroes minimum on the wall. All right, you have a cav hero and a range hero. So now at this point, you really have the option to either go a range focus, or from here on out, just pick 3 infantry heroes, or vice versa. Now, the reason being is because essentially what you're trying to do is you have to think that you're getting a 200% squad attack bonus for each gold hero that you have. Now, when you're free to play, just keep this in mind, because this is ultimately something that is going to have, it makes a big difference, all right? Even if you had, a trickster on the wall, that 200% is better than had you had, a blue, not so great hero of the same quality. It does make a difference, all right? But the main thing that I recommend you do, at least when you're picking your heroes in this particular case, is get your army attack heroes on the wall. And then immediately from here on out, so let's suppose you're an infantry main, all right? Then you're probably going to want to aim for HP and attack. Those are the only two stats that, generally speaking, matter the most. Defense is the least important thing when it comes to an army. I mean, yeah, you can have a lot of it, but it's just generally not going to help you in the long run. All right, now you might notice that, I'm looking through here and I'm clicking on the actual character, not the actual, space here. I'm clicking on this so that I can see what the stats are, all right? So, over here, you can see you get infantry 30%, not very helpful. 30%, still not very helpful. Looking around, there are exceptions where, if you get big guy, there's a 50% and a 30. That's not terrible. It's a lot better than what you would have if you were free to play. But even still, looking at your options, 30 and then 50. Okay, done, sold. All right, now at this point, I've got 60% infantry attack and 100% max HP. Now, I've obviously got a range, and then I have a cav, and they're both army attack. And so at this point, you can kind of make the decision, all right, where if you want, all right, you could just as easily put in a cav focus in here if you want. And, so if you want to be infantry cav, for example, which is one of the stronger front lines that you can get in the game, all right, then you kind of want to start looking for your infantry to cav ratios, and one of the few that you can get is Shadow Light. So in this particular lineup, you're getting 30% into your cav attack, you're getting 40% into your army attack. So realistically here, you're really looking at 100% infantry attack, and then somewhere around 70% cav attack, which is really not terrible, but you're going in imp cav, and it's about as suitable as you can get because you're pretty well even across, having 2 infantry heroes and then 2 cav heroes and then 1 range. Now, it doesn't make that the best, because frankly, you can just as easily assuming that you just wanted to go purely cav, I mean, you can just as easily do this, where you pick nothing but cav heroes. And it really depends, and I say this strongly, okay, is it really does depend on really what you're up against, you know. So if somebody's sending infantry, obviously it's going to help you out if you send nothing but cav bonuses, because really what you're trying to do at this point is you're just trying to make sure your cav take the largest blunt of the blow and take the most amount of damage that they can possibly do. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, there's really nothing wrong with that. It's just on my 2 cents, when you send more than 5 cav heroes, you're really not helping yourself so much when you do like a 50% increase. I mean, yeah, it's nice, but if I was going to trade that for 20% army attack, I'd rather have the army attack. But that's just me, you know. And so, like, for me, you'll always catch me using either 4 of one unit type and then 1 army attack hero, or something akin to that. And the reason being, you know, is obviously you're going to have people that'll argue with me, because if you get into the pay-to-play heroes, that's a little different, because you can actually, if you wanted, you could get just purely of those unit stats, and then it actually comes into favor. But when it comes to a free-to-play, you're not going to find that really relevant, all right? But now that we're done talking about the wall, all right, now assuming you've got that figured out, all right, the next thing you're going to do is obviously you're going to put your war gear on. And this is the closest free-to-play gear I've got on me. Now, obviously, some of you guys will probably be using the Fire-Right Tomahawk, but essentially you're going to be trying to pick out which stats you're going to be focusing on. And then, of course, as soon as you've done that, you got to basically pick out what phalanx you're going to use. All right, so if somebody's coming out and let's say they're attacking you right away, one of the things that I first want to size up, or at least determine, is that the moment I look at the guy, all right, is he in war gear? If he's not in war gear, he's probably not going to do so well. However, if I point and blank, you know, look at somebody that's, you know, so like, and this is important, all right, because if you're really wanting to determine whether you're going to win against somebody, you need to kind of know what kind of gear they're using, what kind of heroes they could be using. And especially when you click on the icon up here, if you've got time, that is, you want to know what kind of troops they're sending. Because ultimately, if they're sending mainly cav, you want to be in a, you know, range phalanx so that you can make the most out of that particular counter. But when you want to determine whether you're going to actually eat the attack or lose, all right, now my general rule of thumb with this is I will have some videos in the description below on traps and stuff of that nature, but the logic there is really not much different when it comes to eating solo attacks. All right, most of the time, okay, if most players in this game are sending, say, okay, let's just assume you're in, like, the beginner kingdoms, all right, and maybe all you have access to is grunts and tier 2 troops, all right? So your tier 1 and tier 2 troop types are the only thing you have access to. The mindset here is if I send 200,000 gladiators, 150,000 sharpshooters, all right, that's 350,000 troops, hypothetically, in a rally, all right? And let's say all you had was tier 1s, you've got to have a little over 2 times of whatever that is, not counting the gear they've got on and the core stats, meaning that, you know, if you're really wanting to size up against somebody, you got to understand that if you are going up against a tier 4 player, a tier 4 unit is going to be about 4 times the amount. A lot of the time, it's like 2.5 times every time you go up a unit tier. All right, so it's very vital in here that if you're trying to trap or you're just trying to eat a solo in that general respect, the higher your core stats are in here, the better. All right, so I mean, if you can only get this up to 7 or 8, great. But it's really going to matter when you're dealing with a player that is really high, because you can see how much of a drastic difference it is from 7 to 10. It is a huge whopping difference. And frankly, if you want to keep yourself in a mildly safe zone, you kind of want to make sure that when you are getting attacked by somebody, all right, please, by God, the guy isn't got tier 4. Because if you're a tier 3 player, I guarantee you're going to want to shelter that right the hell away. Don't even try unless you just so happen to have approximately 2 to 3 million core on you, meaning that you need to have, you know, so if somebody's sending 300,000 tier 4 at you and they're maxed the hell out in gold check gear and all that stuff, on the very high end of things, you've got to have like a little over, like either you've got to have a couple million of these tier 3 to kind of balance that, and you may want to even have some tier 1s to shock absorb, And the only reason why you want those, you can have as low as 500,000 there if you want, all right? But the main idea behind that is you're just trying to shock absorb so that most of that goes into the actual infirm, all right? Because really what's doing the main bulk of the damage here is going to be in your tier 3s and your tier 2s. Because those tier 4s up here, really all they're going to do is basically walk all over you if you're not careful. Now, when you're talking, what's the bare numbers? I mean, that's going to really depend on your core stats, right? If your core stats, if you're popping like a 5 or a 6, yeah, you're going to get completely walked all over. All right. Like, I really recommend that if you are going to be trying to eat attacks from solos and stuff like that, you got to be really, really, like, I almost recommend nobody goes into the fights out there that even go on until you've got at least 8 in here. Because if you don't, it really gets hard. And now I'm not saying that you can't do it in the beginner migration kingdoms because that's a little different. But when you're starting out at a non-migration, you're no longer migration protected, dude, it's you got to be really careful about that, all right? Like if you don't feel like you can actually eat the attack, your judgment is multiplied by 1,000 times by logic, okay? Like you learn more from defeat in this game than you learn from failure. Like you got to learn from your failures, okay? If you think you can eat it, give it a shot. And if you lose it all, then you know that you cannot do that. That's really the stupid, easy, simple way how I've gotten to know where I'm at in this game and how I know, well, okay, I clearly cannot do this. I clearly cannot do that. Like, that is how I know, where I can fail and where I can win. But when it comes to being a free-to-play, right, one of the things that you definitely want to make sure you do before anything, okay, is that you also want to make sure your talents are up to par, okay? Meaning that if you were going to go and say, let's say I only had 150%, right, the things that you definitely want to max out are your squad defense and then whatever unit type you're going to focus in. So if you're going to be a cav player, then you need to be putting all your cav stats into that. All right, now I'm not saying that, you need to just focus purely cav, but to be honest with you, if you're really getting somebody that sends purely infantry at you, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to go all the way on cav attack because you're going to maximize the amount of damage that you can do against them. But obviously, most people don't want to switch their talents every single time that they do that because it's pretty damn pricey to do that, right? So a lot of the time, what I do is I will go all the way into squad health, all the way into squad defense, and even a hold true even down here. I will put all of my effort into that because really that's your core stat. You want the HP and the defense to be fairly high if you can, try not to avoid it, right? And then a lot of the time, what you'll find me doing is I will put as much as I can into one unit type. And if I have a little bit extra, I might even put it into a second unit type that I'm focusing on. So I'll put a lot of effort on that first unit type, and then I won't be too far behind on the second unit type I'm trying to focus on. And that's just so that if I turn out to be wrong and my first unit type is not what they're sending and I don't have enough time, then I might just get lucky with that second unit type, and that'll just save me a little bit of time and a little bit of damage that I'll be suffering. Now, one of the things that obviously, comes in handy when it comes to picking your heroes, okay, is that generally speaking, I recommend that you pick an army attack hero. So Rose Knight or Bomb and Goblin, I use, if I was free to play. That's really recommended. If you can get them, get them. If you haven't got them yet, then pick the unit type you're focusing in. So if you're going to be infantry, pick your infantry, HP, and attack heroes, all right, because that's really where it counts. And so, like Oathkeeper at gold, it's not bad. I mean, frankly, you are a little bit better off if you have that than you don't. And I recommend that if you are going to put heroes on your wall, always consider the tier of the heroes. Because if they're at gold, okay, that's great. But if you have them at like purple and blue, but yet you have some gold heroes, then maybe you need to put the gold heroes on there instead. Assuming, of course, that those gold heroes are helping you on the unit stats that you're doing. And if they don't, but they've got that 200% squad attack, it's still somewhat preferred over some of the other unit sets that you'll actually have. I promise you. But needless to say, if you are trying to defend, and this really holds up time and time again, is that if you are trying to defend, say like a tier 3 player, okay? If you're defending against a tier 3 player, then ultimately you need to be able to size up or assume that if they're sending 250,000 troops at you, of whatever unit type it is, or if it's mixed or vice versa, you need to have exactly the same amount, if not more than that, so that you can ultimately counter that. And so usually I'll see a lot of players that'll put 300,000 troops into all 3 unit types. And that's just to size up the difference in case they send cowards, okay, great. If they send snipers, okay, great. Cavalry, etc. All right, but if you're a tier 2 player, this logic applies. It's just when you start stacking up, okay, and you start putting, like, say, a tier 4 player at you and you're a tier 3, that is where you need to have a sizable amount. Because, like I said, it's always 2.5 times. So if I'm a tier 3 player and I have 500, so I've got 250,000 fighters coming at me, and they've got all the stacked gear and all the stats and everything, then logically you need to have approximately triple that almost in order to really compensate for it. So if you're sending 250,000 fighters, then you might need to have a little over 750,000 tier 3 cab. And that's not saying that you don't have to. You could just as easily roll with a mil or 500k or whatever you think is safest. But ultimately, the main key factor here is that whenever you take a large bulk of damage, whatever army type is going to take it is ultimately going to slash at a certain percentage of it. So, like, if I'm going to send, 250,000, but the army attack and everything else combined on that one player individually is so godly and inferior, like, you're so inferior to them that it's ungodly ridiculous, then you're probably just better off shouldering. Like, generally, and if you guys want some tips on how to actually shelter more, I'll have some videos in the description below you can actually watch. But needless to say, I just really hope that this kind of general rule of thumb kind of helps you with defending in this game. I mean, really, at its core, okay, one of the things that you definitely want to make sure you have is the general rule of thumb is that if you are having someone attack you, I don't recommend having 43,000 for an infirm. Your infirm is actually a pretty big deal in this game because, frankly, the more infirms you have, if you were to get them at 25, that's 5% army HP you're adding. You might want to click and look at the info on all of your buildings because it will teach you a thing or two. But needless to say, I say that the minimum for, like, rallies and stuff like that is like a 400,000 infirm. When it comes to solos, I would say anywhere between 200,000 and 300,000 is a safe spot when it comes to eating solos. And not always, because sometimes if you're a tier 1 player eating tier 4 attacks, yeah, you're probably going to want a hell of a lot more than that. But needless to say, check out the videos in the description below if you actually want to learn more about this particular topic. And needless to say, I'll see you guys next time.